Hope you like this. If you do, give it a thumbs up and leave any comments below. And remember to subscribe to the channel to be kept up to date on all my hypnotic bedtime stories. So I hope you enjoy the story.
So as you listen to me and begin to drift comfortably asleep, you can allow your eyes to close. And with your eyes closed as you drift comfortably asleep, I don't know whether you'll find yourself drifting deeper asleep with the sound of my voice, with the words that I use, or with the spaces between my words. And as you drift comfortably asleep, you can have a sense of a person walking into an old house. And as they walk into this old house, they want to go exploring. They don't know what this house will be like. They know this old house hasn't been lived in for hundreds of years. And there are sheets over some of the furniture. And there's some areas where it's quite dusty. And this house looks like it hasn't been lived in for those hundreds of years. And they walk around exploring the downstairs. They look at the living room and the living area. They notice the bookcases full of really old books. And they have some curiosity about those books. And they take a couple of books off the shelves and flick through those really old books, listening to the sound of the pages as they turn of those really old books, and the smell of those books, and the weight of those books in their hands. And they put the books back on the shelves before continuing to wander round, wandering into the kitchen, seeing it all clean and tidy, yet looking very old, wandering into the dining room, wandering around the house, noticing the way the light shines in the windows and creates shards of light, catching dust particles in the air. As they then start heading up the stairs to explore upstairs. And halfway up the stairs, they see this beautiful painting. This beautiful painting of a vast landscape. And in the foreground of this painting is what looks like steps leading down a hillside. And they can notice the perspective, and they can notice those steps walking down the hillside, down to some countryside, and then a path leading on from the foot of those steps, weaving through fields and countryside, off into the distance, towards the ocean, where they can see in the distance the ocean with some boats on the ocean. They can see the way the sun is setting behind the ocean. And something about this picture captivates them. And they go to touch the picture, but when their hand reaches the picture, there's a fuzzy feeling at their fingertips, And they notice their fingertips pass right through the picture. And they carry on pushing their hand forward, and the fuzzy feeling moves from the fingertips up the fingers, and eventually their whole hand is through that picture. They keep pushing their hand forward, and the fuzzy feeling is at their wrist, and the fuzzy feeling reaches their elbow. And then they touch with their other hand on a different point on the picture, and that hand starts going through as well, with the fuzzy feeling on the fingertips, and the palm of the hand, and the wrist, and then the elbow. And they realise there's this odd experience, that they seem to be passing into the picture. And so they take a step forward. And a part of them in their mind is thinking, this is stupid, I'm going to take a step forward and kick through the picture and damage the picture. While another part of them is convinced that if both their hands have passed through the picture and are inside the painting, then there's a good chance that their foot will end up inside the painting. And they put their foot forward, and their foot passes into the picture, and they follow their foot and find themselves stepping into the picture. And they end up having the whole of themselves passing into the picture, and then find themselves stood inside the picture, and they turn around to look at what's behind them. And they see what looks like a picture, what looks like a painting of the inside of a mansion, of the inside of that old house. A painting at the top of the stairs, and they can see a staircase the other side of the picture. And they recognise that that's where they've just come from. And then they walk down a few stairs. They walk down a few of those steps, down that hillside, so that they can get some perspective, and they turn and look back. And it looks like a picture frame with a picture in it, randomly positioned at the top of the stairs, at the top of all those steps. They walk back up the steps. They walk around the back of the picture and realise they can physically walk around that picture, that the back of the picture is just like the back of a canvas. And they walk back round the front again, and they follow those steps down that hillside, walking down deeper with each step towards that countryside. And they can hear countryside sounds. They can see that sun setting over the sea. And they decide to walk down to that beach. So they walk all the way down, walk through the countryside. They follow that path down towards the seafront. And when they reach the seafront, they take a moment to find somewhere to sit. And they sit down and gaze out at the boats on the ocean. Listen to the sound of the water lapping on the shore. Breathing in some sea air. Hearing sounds of birds. And watching that sun setting. Watching how shadows are stretching out. How the colour is changing as the sun sets. watching the boats bobbing around out to sea. Being aware that everything just feels so calm and relaxed. Everything just feels so peaceful here. And everything feels so peaceful, they just begin to feel so relaxed. And start to get that feeling like they want to just close their eyes and just drift off a moment. To close their eyes so that they can enjoy with their senses the sounds of the ocean. The sense of breathing in that sea air. So they let their eyes close a moment, just feeling the last of the rays of the sun on their eyelids, on their face, as they drift and dream in their mind, listening to the sea lapping on the shore. And then they notice that the feeling of the sun on their face is almost gone, and they let their eyes open, and they see that some of the boats out to sea have little lights on now. They notice that stars are becoming visible in the sky. Almost like twinkling pinpricks of light. That as they lay on their back and gaze up at the sky, so their eyes get more and more used to the dark. And as their eyes get more used to the dark, so they begin to notice different colours, almost like different coloured clouds in the sky. Up high in space, they begin to see more and more stars. They begin to notice a band of stars stretching across the sky, and what looks like a band of dust mixed in with those stars. And they know this is the Milky Way, and they gaze up at that and enjoy looking at that. And they feel so relaxed. They feel so relaxed, they find themselves just drifting off asleep on the edge of the ocean. And then as they drift back to wakeful awareness, while the sun is rising, they realize they've just had the most beautiful, relaxing, wonderful night's sleep. They feel so refreshed and alert. They feel like their mind has been cleared. And they explore along this coastline. And as they explore, they see an archway of woodland, an archway stretching over a woodland path. And they decide to explore into that woodland. And they walk into the woodland and notice the morning sunlight, creating dancing shards of light through the trees on the path ahead, crisscrossing and dancing, while they listen to the sound of the breeze blowing in the trees. They listen to the sounds of birds. They have a feeling of each footstep they take, and a sense of comfort and serenity. And after a while, of walking through the woodland. They see a little tunnel. It looks like a little doorway, and they go to that tunnel. They open that doorway. They see some steps leading down into that tunnel, and they decide to follow those steps. Curious where it'll take them, they follow those steps down into that tunnel. They close the door behind them. They enjoy the cool feeling in the tunnel and can feel the breeze blowing through the tunnel. So they know there's obviously an exit somewhere. They feel that breeze and they follow the breeze. And they find themselves coming out on the most beautiful beach. That's just perfect. They look at the sand and the sea. They look at the sky, and they notice that this beach is in an alcove. It's its own private bay, and the only way to this beach is this secret tunnel. And they realise perhaps that someone had created that secret tunnel because they had somehow seen that beach and they wanted to be able to go on that beach. But they didn't want lots of others to go on the beach. They wanted their own private area. And now this person had found that beach. And they went for a little swim in the sea, which was warm and comfortable. Then they lay in the sun, drying off in the sun, enjoying some warmth and relaxation. And then after a while, as the sun began to set again, they went back to that secret tunnel. They head through the secret tunnel, back out into the woods. And they followed their way through the woods, enjoying the sounds, the sights, the feeling of the breeze, noticing how the dancing light had moved to the other side. And then exiting that area back onto that beach. And they wandered along the beach, knowing that they're heading back to that house. So they take their time to take in being on this beach. Take the time to take in relaxing. Before going back to those steps and finding their way back to that painting. And as they walk back to the painting, they can notice birds flying up high. They take a moment to stop near the top, to turn and look out over where they've just been. And they see that the sun is almost as set as it was when they entered this area. And so they continued up those steps. They could see the painting at the top, with the view in that painting looking exactly as it did before. And they tentatively put a hand forward to touch the painting. Feel that fuzzy feeling as the hand passes through the painting. They do the same with their other hand. And then they take a step through the painting, stepping the whole body through that painting and ending up in that house again. And they turn around and they look at the painting and they admire the painting and realise it looks just as it did. And they look at their time and notice that less time has passed than they thought. That it seems like maybe just a minute or two have passed since they stepped into that painting. And they wondered what this experience was all about. They put their hand forward to touch that painting again, and their hand touched the painting. And they touched it with the other hand, and that hand touched the painting. And somehow they now couldn't manage to step through the painting. And it was curious, it was as if none of that experience had happened. That a couple of minutes had passed, and maybe they just stood here for a couple of minutes and it was in their mind. And yet it felt very real to them, and they're convinced they had really stepped into that painting. And so they carried on up the stairs to the next floor. They wandered around that floor, looking in the different rooms, in one bedroom, in another, in the bathroom, continuing to explore this old house. And then they saw a book on a bedside table, and they sat down carefully on the bed. They picked up the book. They started looking through that book. And they saw that painting in the book. They saw a drawing of the painting. They saw an illustration of the painting. And they read the writing that went with that. And the writing about that painting being a special kind of painting, being a portal to another land and another time. And they read that at any one time you can only pass through it once, each way, and that it takes a while for it all to reset. It takes a while for the magic to build up again, to allow you to be able to step through that painting again. And the person wondered to themselves how many people have perhaps walked up and down those stairs over the years, have seen the painting and never once approached it. They also wondered whether anyone has ever tried cleaning the painting, and at the point of trying to clean the painting, they've discovered themselves putting their own hand through the painting. And how many people perhaps have stepped into that painting before? And whether the sunrise and the sunsets that happen there are all just the same day playing over and over again, and how much of a world is through that painting. And they wondered whether they can come back here again and go into that painting again a number of times to explore these ideas. They didn't see anyone when they went through that painting, but they wondered if it worked the other way round, whether anyone from inside the painting could see this random painting at the top of the steps, at the top of the hill, and decide to see what's the other side of the painting, and come out of the painting land into their land. And if so, Who might it be, and where do they come from, and what is their experience? The person had so many questions he wanted answers for. And so he sat back on the bed and he continued to read that book, giving him these different answers. And as he read that book, getting these different answers, he found himself lying back on that bed and drifting comfortably and relaxed, asleep.